You're listening to Thinking Outside the Bud, where we speak with entrepreneurs, investors, thought leaders, researchers, advocates, and policymakers who are finding new and exciting ways for cannabis to positively impact business, society, and culture. And now, here is your host, business coach, Bruce Eckfeldt.
Are you a CEO looking to scale your company faster and easier? Check out Thrive Roundtable. Thrive combines a moderated peer group mastermind, expert one-on-one coaching, access to proven growth tools, and a 24/7 support community. Created by Inc. award-winning CEO and certified scaling up business coach Bruce Eckfeldt, Thrive will help you grow your business more quickly and with less drama. For details on the program, visit eckfeldt.com/thrive. That's ECKFELDT.com/thrive.
Welcome, everyone. This is Thinking Outside the Bud. I'm Bruce Eckfeldt. I'm your host. And our guest today is Michael Sassano. He is founder of Solaris Farms and of Somai Pharmaceuticals. We're going to talk to him a little bit about what's going on generally in the cannabis space, specifically in the Nevada, Las Vegas area where they're based, just kind of understanding the dynamics of the market. I think one of the interesting things about cannabis is that we're in this, state by state, kind of economy, state by state ecosystems. And, it's really interesting to see how different states are playing out, what's happening, what we're learning from this kind of mass experiment we have on a state-by-state basis. So with that, Michael, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. So let's do a little bit of background first. I always love kind of hearing people's stories, how they got involved in cannabis, then we can talk a little bit about the business. What's the background? How did you get involved in cannabis and what was the impetus to start Solaris and, do the businesses you've been working on?
Initially, my background was investments. So I looked at the cannabis industry back many years ago as a real estate play and as an interesting business line that was definitely developing. By 2016, I felt that it was best that I actually build, operate, and run my own facility. So I started Solaris Farms with a few investors. And since then, my knowledge has grown to a point where, we've been expanding.
And I guess I always find there's a learning process. Like in the early days, when you went to kind of decide, okay, look, I'm going to get involved in cannabis, I'm going to, find the investors, start the company. What were some key things that were kind of learning experiences for you through that process? Well,
it was very underground at that time. As a matter of fact, up until maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we didn't even use emails or say the words marijuana or cannabis. You were always, felt like you were doing something wrong in a certain way. So you were extra cautious, and that really limited the flow of information. In today's day and age, information is flying, and you can easily just look on the web, call up a multi-billion-dollar nutrition company and get advice for your cannabis today. So, information flow is definitely dramatically increased and improved our business.
Yeah. And in terms of area of focus, so Solaris Farms, to give us a sense of kind of strategy, was there anything specific you were trying to build in terms of a capability or in terms of a position in the market? Or I guess give us a sense of how you saw yourself fitting into the either local or general community cannabis industry.
The idea at the time was to build a high-tech desert greenhouse that can grow cannabis with the extremes of high heat and very cold colds in the Las Vegas area. Many times throughout that years developing Solaris Farms, I kept thinking to myself, how insane is this to try to grow, with an unforgiving environment?
Yeah, exactly. So it's like all the worst conditions.
And you were using a greenhouse technology as opposed to indoor to try to get more eco-friendly and conserve on non-renewable resource usage.
Yeah.
So, but we were successful. And we have some of the top bud in Las Vegas, and we're represented at all the major dispensaries. And we still have a few little dispensaries to get into, but all the major ones carry our product and are confident in our delivery.
Yeah. And what was the trick? There's various growing strategies, right? You can be outdoor, you can be greenhouse, you're kind of in between where you can be indoor, controlled environment. The greenhouse is a little bit in between where you're still exposed to elements and to weather and temperatures to some extent, but you're able to control it. How have you dialed in or how have you kind of straddled this and figured out an effective strategy for growing in this kind of environment?
time and a lot of work and a lot of data to figure out what's the right mix. And like you point out, you have exposure. So you have exposure to the weather. So you have to keep your environmentals constantly changing with the weather outside. There's never one day you walk in and say, okay, our computer systems are doing everything we want to do. You do have exposure to bugs. You don't want to use pesticides. So you're using natural beneficials and finding that mix during the season when it's good to use. You have a very low humidity environment, which is great from the standpoint of molds and aspergilluses and things of that nature, which can fail your labs and hurt your product. But you have controls in place where you can use that lack of humidity in order to benefit you, yet still try to get the humidity in the lower stages and with the perspiration of plants. So it's a lot of trial and error, to make the environment work. But it really is the data and being able to look back and say, here's where our success, here's where our mistakes happen, and here's how we improve.
Yeah. And you mentioned in the beginning, you came out of real estate. What were some of the things that you needed to, I guess, the things you needed to know or learn, and the things you didn't know you need to learn that later you needed to learn, about making this whole operations work effectively? I
mean, from the real estate standpoint, you're developing a piece of real estate, but you're developing a greenhouse, and that greenhouse has to function inside the environments that you're at. And you have to make sure in the beginning that you're setting all the right equipment for your success, but then you also have to reevaluate all your equipment and redo it. So whereas when you used to build a building and you would deliver that product, you would be all set and you'd just be solving little problems. With the greenhouse, you're solving problems in that development on an everyday basis.
Yeah.
And, from the investment side, when I came from Wall Street, you can analyze a business as much as you want. But cannabis, when it's developing and you have heavy regulation that's changing and heavy taxation, well, no matter what numbers you put on that pro forma, it does not translate exactly as you thought it would be in the beginning. And you have to realize, you have to give yourself a lot of forgiveness and stretch your timelines out so that you can communicate to investors in a smart way.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I'm curious, given your background on Wall Street and kind of understanding really the capital structure and financing and how you make these companies work from a investor point of view. What's been similar? What's been different on that side of things? How give us a sense of the cannabis industry as from a financing investment point of view. What works about it? What doesn't? Where are we in some of that?
Well, I mean, the biggest similarities is whatever surprise you're going to get, you're going to get. So make sure you deal with that. That's a constant in any business or investment that you're doing.
Yeah.
What's different is that we've seen a lot of cycles just in a short period of time. And even if you look at COVID, the situation that happened to us, well, we learned that we were essential. That was a surprise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We learned that we can survive through this time and actually flourish. That was a surprise. Mm-hmm. So downside surprises that normally, my investment mind would say, look, this is done. They're closing off all the businesses.
Yeah.
That didn't occur for us. And instead of going into a fetal position, we hit the gas and we just kept producing more and more product. And we said, all right, let's lower the prices. And we were selling out every week. And it turned out that there's now a shortage in the market because some people, a lot of the growers, took crops out of rotation, reduced the amount of product they were performing, cut some of their staff. Well, we hired staff. We gave raises and we produced more. And, now we have a backlog of product that we need to deliver and we're at full capacity.
Interesting. And was this just because you're a brilliant strategist and, you saw exactly what was going to happen and, knew how to play it? Or was this luck? Like, give us a sense of that decision making. Because it certainly could have gone either way, right? I think there was a period of time where a lot of companies in general, but certainly cannabis companies were like, we need to go into hibernation for 6 months while we figure this out. What allowed you to kind of be successful in that?
I mean, I wrote a lot of articles, day one, starting when they were just starting to close borders, and was telling people strategies for taking crops out of rotation. And when it came down to talking to the board about, what we should do, all the partners said, look, let's just hit the pedal. Let's just go.
Yeah.
Let's just keep producing and this will clear. Kind of like Days of Thunder, hit that pedal. And by the time that, rec clears. We're going to be through this.
I love it.
And it worked out. I mean, I can't tell you that we didn't doubt each other, and doubt our ideas on a regular basis. The more news that came out, the more, jittery we became. But we held steady, and
do you feel like it was a contrarian play? Like you were kind of like, hey, look, most people are going to react to this by, kind of getting defensive, kind of, hibernating. And we have a strategic option here to go for it. And yeah, while it might be risky, if everyone else is going to go left and we go right, that could be a really great move for us. How much of that kind of thinking was happening for you and your team?
It was exactly that. It was a completely contrarian play. And it didn't come without a lot of nerves being shattered over that time. We played it cool, but we had to keep ourselves in check. It was definitely a bold move.
Yeah. Any dark moments? Any pieces of news that came out or something that you were like, oh no, what do we do? I'm kind of curious on how that played out for you.
It was quite heartbreaking when they initially said we're essential and the dispensaries can stay open. And then they said, nope, just a few days later, dispensaries are closed. I did even have to come back and write follow-up articles 1 or 2 weeks later saying, look, we've decided to go for it. After I wrote an article just a week before saying taking crop out of rotation is a very smart idea. So, yeah.
Some might even say that was part of your strategy.
Yeah, I wish I was just trying to be honest with the situation. Hey, I told you to do this, but we went for it. So, pedal at your own will.
Yeah, no, interesting. And so, you mentioned that the market right now in Nevada is that there's a dearth of supply and prices are increasing. How is that just because the production went down? Everyone kind of decided to rotate and not produce and, stem that, or, demand up, a combination of the two. What's your analysis?
Not less than a month ago, I was telling the public, Las Vegas was the most decimated city, which it was, because it's heavily reliant on tourism.
Yeah.
I was telling people that sales are down 80%. I was telling people that, our prices are slashed in half so that we can sell. And we were selling out weekly at half the price. Production facilities were closed mostly because they weren't making the gummy bears and the products as much. And the big sellers were the flower, which we excelled at. That's not less than 1 month ago. Now I'm telling people, because the casinos did open in the last month, people are out there buying. You can see dispensaries are filled. Let's say we're about 60% from our high, or even 70% from our high to be conservative. But a lot of growers took crops out of rotation and reduced strap. Well, that takes 3 months to get back to a crop being farmed. In that time, now our prices are actually above pre-COVID times. And, our volumes are increasing. So this is definitely a function of the tourism coming back to some degree, a strong local market that was bud buyers as opposed to product buyers. There was a change in shift in buying strategies. So I would say both those two combinations are increasing it. Plus the lack of supply on the market, helped us out tremendously.
Yeah. What was the change in the buying strategy? The buyers, give me more information on that.
Well, they switched from, higher priced edibles to lower priced and longer lasting bud sales. So, and rather than buying grams and pre-rolls, people were buying half ounces and ounces and stocking up even through the entire period, not just in the beginning.
Got it. So consumer buyer behavior changed because of the situation. It's like, I have to stretch my dollar a little bit more. I'm just going to buy raw flour and I'm going to buy a lot higher quantities because I'm stocking up.
And probably using more because you're not at work on a daily basis.
I'm stressed out and there's a pandemic going on in the world.
All of it.
Yeah. And so then my kind of follow-on question on all this is like, what's going to happen, right? So do we swing the pendulum too far? What do you think what are going to happen with prices in the coming months as, people are going to, hey, prices are great. I'm going to plant a lot more. And now we swing the other way. How do you see this playing out?
Absolutely. People try to get back online and get their crops back in rotation. And like I said, that's a 3-month process to get back up to where you are. In the meantime, people are short of cash, so they don't have necessarily the ability to just crank up and hire people in order to support the plants and the natural needs of taking care of the plants. So as one of the top 10 largest producers here in the state, we're in a unique position to fill that void on why the smaller groups, the smaller indoors, get back up to their production levels, recapitalize, hire people up, and start to move their product again. Size in this case does matter. The larger grows, are really supplying a large majority of the market. And, to that effect, we saw the writing on the wall with our successes, and we're going through a three-way merger right now. So this is the survivors, let's say, the ones that are taking care of the market. We're seeing increased activity and financing activity, and now for us, a merger activity.
Yeah. And tell me a little bit about the strategy behind that, and what's the hope in being able to bring these companies together? What's the advantage strategically that you see in the market?
Well, now we're a top 10 vertical in Nevada, and I believe we're the only a private top 10 vertical that's not in a deal with a larger corporation at this point. The idea is Solaris Farms is a growing production house. We merged with 2 dispensaries in Las Vegas proper and a new 10,000 square foot production facility that just came online. So now you have a true vertical where Solaris can power the flower to the dispensary. Solaris can power the trim and the ancillary products needed to make products, whether it's, the gummy bears, pills, drops, and the various products that you can make from the production side. And that can then power through the dispensary for sales to the public. So, it's the complete triangle in the vertical. And it's in a much desired market. Las Vegas, still home to the largest amount of Pubcos, second to Florida.
Yeah. And I guess, how do you see that market playing out? Is there, as we mature, I guess, as an industry, as we mature as a sector, what are the driving forces here? What's going to shape cannabis, or what's going to make cannabis companies successful in the coming quarters, years, as this industry grows?
Well, we've gone through a down time in cannabis for the last year and let's say a half, where a lot of companies they were concentrating on growth, but they weren't concentrating on good corporate governance and good financing, and they thought they can raise money forever. Well, that stopped, and the focus became on profitability, shedding non-performing assets, giving a realistic approach as to the opening of the markets. From the U.S. standpoint, it's the gorilla in the room, $12-13 billion in sales, in legal cannabis sales. Clearly, companies that have stronger financial positions and considered profitability, those are going to be the main drivers of merger activity going forward. Canada, which can produce more product than their whole entire country will need for the next 10 to 100 years, let's say, as an exaggeration, was heavily relying on Europe opening up. Well, that didn't happen. It wasn't where they thought it would be. So you see the large Canadian companies scaling back, not just internally selling assets and overabundance of growth, but also scaling back recently in Europe, scaling back their plans and coming to a more realistic approach. And then you have other countries, South America and other countries, Australia and even Asia to some effect, coming online, Africa. So you really can't put the genie back in the bottle. The expansion is happening, and cannabis is sweeping across the globe, albeit slowly but surely. Yeah.
And was this is what happens in early industries? You get these bubbles, people get super optimistic, and then things don't play out, things crash, merger acquisition. Is this normal, or do you think this is really different or unique to cannabis?
The writing was on the wall as people rushed in with capital into the Canadian market, just flooded it with capital, and they had to build what they promised to build. Both sides were understandable, but both sides, were not necessarily communicating as to where the demand in the future is. And also, you really can't control government regulation. It moves at its own pace, and it's not the most logical business pace. It moves at a different pace, and it's a different drum. U.S. kept surging. The U.S. sales kept increasing. States kept coming online. It was predictable. Some companies didn't really pay attention to their corporate governance. That's just bad management. But for the most part, everybody participated in the increase in the United States because it was there.
Yeah. In terms of the merger acquisition process, I'm curious, and since you're coming out of finance and have some insights here, I'm always kind of considering the regulatory kind of challenges and issues around cannabis and maybe the investor willingness to get involved in cannabis companies. Like as we kind of shake out here and you've got some underperforming companies, underperforming assets, distressed assets that become available for acquisition, is this, and also because, that like federal bankruptcy doesn't apply and things like, I just can't help but think like it's not going to be kind of a normal run-of-the-mill M&A kind of shakeout process because of these restrictions? Or do you see it now that it works? Like those companies will be resolved into assets and they'll be acquired and reutilized and, the financial will be corrected. How do you see this playing out?
Well, it's very specific. So in one side, you think, okay, hey, I can pick up a bunch of non-performing assets and do well with that. Yeah. That's not necessarily what people are thinking today, because it takes a long time to retool a greenhouse or an indoor or a grow facility or develop a brand. Just having the asset is not necessarily where people want to be these days. They want something that's successful. They want cash flow. They want profitability. They want to acquire personnel that knows what they're doing and they don't have to retool. There's not like there's a plethora of talent out there. You want to acquire something that comes with the talent and all the corporate governance in place, and immediately start hitting your bottom line immediately. Yeah. If you have to develop something for 1-2 years, if you have to retool something, well, that may not be the amount of money it's going to take to retool that to grow in a proper way may not be the area where you want to be concentrating on. So distressed assets aren't finding really buyers right now. People are looking for people that are already got their stuff together. So I would be more looking towards the larger corporations are looking for, people who have it all together. And then there will be people who see value in distressed assets. There's plenty of shuttered or closed grows. There's plenty of people who came in and put a lot of equipment that's beautiful, but they can't make it profitable. And you could pick that up at a reasonable price. But that has to come with those people being in pain and ready to sell it. And as you point out, there is no bankruptcy. There's only receivership. So unless you have a lot of debt, which generally there weren't a lot of financing options available, private equity people may have been debt holders. You may have done a sale leaseback. In those cases, those people are professionals and they will take that asset and make it perform. So you'll have a little bit of both, but I would imagine a lot of what you're going to be reading, especially over this year and next year, similar to what we've gone through, are success stories that are coming out and merging as opposed to distressed assets that need a lot more money to be put into them.
Yeah. Interesting. I think this is the first time, cannabis is certainly going through a correction like this or a situation like this. And so I'm kind of curious to see how it plays out and, how it's similar or different from other industries when this happens. So let's talk about international stuff a little bit. You mentioned, part of the challenge in Canada was that they were really kind of hoping for a couple of these European countries to really open up and become markets for them. I think everyone was kind of hoping that. Obviously, here in the States, it's a little problematic because of the regulatory legal situation we're in. We can't do export. But what do you see on the international side in terms of opportunities, in terms of markets? Is there anything that's really interesting for you? Give us your take on what's going internationally with cannabis.
Well, my company, SOMI, is building an extraction facility in Portugal and a cultivation and extraction facility in Greece. So I do believe in the long term that Europe, which will cater to 760 million people as opposed to a state-by-state model in the United States, will take hold. Now, will it be this year? No. Our models predict you won't really start seeing some movement until 2022, 2023, and really not till 2024. So being in a developmental stage in a country in Europe, makes sense for today, tomorrow, and the next day. It's just logical business that eventually it will open up. And they are showing a lot of progress on the medical market for marijuana. And a few countries are dabbling in the recreational, which we think is even longer than 2024, 2025, besides a few countries that'll come out with pilot programs. So, the large population, the acceptance in Europe, it's definitely going to be there. But it's not going to be there today. So, my advice to people, which is exactly our model, is we're scaling in slowly. Instead of building the Taj Mahal tomorrow to service the population of Europe, we're doing reasonable 20, 30,000 square foot production facilities, 40,000, 80,000 square foot of grow, but in a very economical fashion. We're doing a smaller spend that we can scale in, and we can either scale up on the properties we have, or as another country comes on, we can make that same scalable model in order to service the demand as it comes. So plant a flag early, don't overbuild, and scale in slowly as the market develops.
Yeah. And I guess, how do you see the U.S. playing, or what is going to be U.S.'s role in the global cannabis industry?
Well, the U.S. is the leader in extraction and products, and even to a large extent, flower. There's just too many years. Canada came online. Sure, they were part of the black market back in the day, but the legalization in the United States happened with California 15, 20 years ago, Colorado 10, 12 years ago. The West Coast, has been developing for well over a decade now to some degree. And, extraction and product refinement and competitive markets, consumer demands, hundreds of different kinds of products. This is not something you see in Canada. This is not something you see coming out of the Netherlands. This is not something you see in Europe, Asia, South America. So clearly we're the technological leaders, in the industry. We're also the largest market at $12 billion, far beyond Canada at $2-3 billion. So, the money's there, the advancement is there. If we can just get ourselves together on a federal level and stop the bickering, look, we could come out of this. 2019, cannabis industry was the largest percentage increase of employment. We provide jobs, we provide taxation, we provide state taxation. So it's a good thing if we want to get into the export and continue to be leaders on a global basis that we advance.
Yeah. And what do you think is going to happen? I'll say when, not if, we have, changes in federal law, descheduling, cannabis. How does that end up affecting it? Because we're in this funny situation where every state has its own kind of economy and its market and supply chain and everything. And all of a sudden we go to this federal, more national industry, that's going to be a huge shakeup. How does this play out? How do you envision this playing out, particularly for someone like yourself as a cultivator? You're going to be competing against folks who are in prime Northern California growing areas. How does that work?
It'll be heavily competitive, and it is going to be tricky with the states cordoned off. I imagine it'll look something like, similar to tobacco and alcohol, where it's taxed in that state. You have a little stamp on your cigarette pack or your alcohol pack, and it's taxed in that state. And sure, with the states like California, Oregon, where they have large swaths of production, overproduction, competing from a desert grow in Nevada, will be different. But we have advantages because we don't have humidity. We have less failure rates. Our lab testing is much more stringent. So as federal rules come in, you can expect more stringent labs than what California and states like Oregon and Washington are used to. And, we have a plethora of sun. So we've given the low humidity and plethora of sun, our labs should compete on a greater basis than those states. So, it's going to be a little bit of this and a little bit of that, like everything. And we positioned our grow right next to the airport here. So we're literally a stone's throw from the airport in preparation for the future that we will be flying our product out of here. Clearly way too early, but,
Hey, well, you know what? You're thinking ahead, and making some decisions like that. It's what creates future opportunities, right? That's why companies become overnight successes, because they've been working at it for 20 years. Tell me a little bit about if I gave you a magic wand and to change anything in the industry right now, and anything that you would love to see happen, or, changes you'd like to see?
I really, like the openness of the industry and the flow of information that's going on today. And I would like to see that increase, where people are teaching everybody and very clear about the benefits of this industry. I think it's imperative, that a lot of old prejudices end up getting broken down. Even the older generation, my parents' generation, are sampling very low dosage cannabis products to help with their arthritis and their pain relief, dizziness, nausea, increase of eating. I hear this a lot from my parents' friends, and it's giving them a whole new life. And so dispelling a lot of these old rumors and opening up these demographics, that are used to taking a lot of pills from pharma. I think as people go away from that, I think that would be one of the greatest benefits I could see from the cannabis usage. I myself don't take pharma pills. So I believe that cannabis can help people and is helping people.
Yeah. Michael, this has been great. If people want to find out more about you, more about Solaris, more about SOMI, what's the best way to get that information?
You can look on our websites, www.solarisfarms.org or www.somipharma.eu. And if you pull up my LinkedIn, it's probably one of my most utilized social media platforms, Michael Sassano. You'll see me.
Great. I'll make sure that the links are in the show notes here. Michael, thank you so much for taking the time. Great conversation. I'm excited for you and the recent merger. Congratulations on that, and look forward to keeping in touch.
Great. Thanks for having me on.
You've been listening to Thinking Outside the Bud with business coach Bruce Eckfeldt. To find a full list of podcast episodes, download the tools and worksheets, and access other great content, visit the website at thinkingoutsidethebud.com. And don't forget to sign up for the free newsletter at thinkingoutsidethebud.com/newsletter.